Drama in North Carolina's 9th district. If you can remember, that is the race involving Mark Harris, who is the Republican, and Democrat Dan McCready. There still has not been a certified decision, and in fact, there will be a re-election in that district. The re-election has been announced by the election board in the state, and the reason for this is because testimony has already begun in the case involving the Republican, again, that's Harris, Mark Harris. This story is out of control, it's crazy. Let me give you the details. So sworn testimony has illuminated the inner workings of political operative L. McCrae Dowless's operation that paid about $3 for every collected absentee ballot request and $2.50 for each collected absentee ballot. Now, he was paying people that he personally knew, and this is the political operative who was working for Harris. He would get people to collect these ballots and he would pay them money for it. Now, the individuals who signed on for this claimed that they didn't know that they were doing anything wrong. They didn't even really care or think to question it because they were making money. The more ballots, the better. And many of them did testify during this case. The scheme has called into question whether Mark Harris, the Republican candidate, really outpolled his Democratic opponent, Dan McCready. Now, one of the individuals who agreed to collect the ballots said the following during testimony: they sometimes filled in ballots or signed as witnesses for voters they never met in an ink color specifically chosen so it would not arouse suspicion at local elections offices. As if this story couldn't get more, dramatic, the son of Harris actually testified against him, as did his stepdaughter. Now, before we get to his stepdaughter, let's go to his son. He says that he noticed that Dowless was doing things that were questionable. He brought those issues up to his father, but his father allegedly said, no, he says he's doing everything by the book and we're gonna go ahead and trust him. Here is some of the testimony here.
After having the conversation with my dad where he basically filled me in on the April 6th meeting with McCrae, I expressed my concerns based on everything that I did know up to that point. Namely, my belief that McCrae had engaged in collecting ballots in 2016. I told him that collecting ballots was a felony and I would send him the statute that showed that collecting ballots was a felony.
So I want to make a quick correction. I said that Harris's son and stepdaughter testified against him. Actually, Harris's son, but Dowless's stepdaughter testified against Dowless. Okay, so I want to make that correction. Also, Mark Harris's son is an attorney himself, and my guess is that he was subpoenaed to testify, and he was clear in telling the truth, and I give him a lot of credit for that. But he also said, look, I love my father. I don't have any issues with him. There are no scores to settle here, but I do think that he made some poor decisions, and I tried to warn him about it. So that was the point of his testimony.
Yeah, so by the end, Harris had gotten to the point, the dad, where he also said, no mas. Okay, we should have a new election. But that's only after all the evidence had already come out, and then they had testimony, and it became deeply embarrassing. And then his son came out and said, I told him, and I gave the emails to the investigators showing that I warned them that I think that this guy had done illegal things in the past. And by the way, Dowless is a convicted felon, and he had done perjury and fraud before. So it's absolutely clear what Dowless was up to, and so the son is a really good guy. I mean, at least in this context, he's an assistant U.S. attorney in North Carolina, and when investigators came, he thought his dad had already turned in the emails that the son had sent him. So he brought copies of the emails with him and gave it to the investigators. The investigators like, wow, this is amazing. You told your dad a year ago to not use this guy because he might be doing illegal things? He's like, what, my dad didn't tell you? So it's really bad, right?
Yeah.
So only after all of that comes out does Mark Harris turn around and go, yeah, we should probably have a new election. So he gets no credit for that because the Republicans will later pretend, what do you mean? Mark Harris called for the new election.
You want to know something particularly crazy about Harris? So he says there should be a new election, of course, after all this evidence comes out. But then he was asked by the press, do you plan on running in the re-election or the new election? And he wouldn't answer.
Oh, that's interesting.
As if it is a consideration. That was reported by CBS, yeah.
Look, the Republicans would probably be better off running someone else. But hey, that's their problem, not my problem. But politicians, they never, ever want to let it go. So I'm sure that he'll want to run again. And then, by the way, he was supposed to testify himself, but his son does this devastating testimony and is honest. And again, gives his son a lot of credit here, okay? And then he comes up and goes, yeah, I guess we should probably have a new election. Anyway, I got a medical condition or something. I gotta go.
That's exactly right. That was his reaction. It's crazy.
So he didn't even testify past that.
Okay, so I'm going to make sure you guys know what we're about to talk about is speculation because we don't know for sure. But do you really buy that Harris was completely unaware that Dallas?
Oh, he absolutely knew, in my opinion, based on the evidence that we have. I mean, John Harris said, look, this Dallas guy did it to you in another election. And so Harris knows, Mark Harris knows, okay? That's why he probably hired Dallas. The guy is super shady. I mean, he's been convicted of this stuff before and he apparently might have done it to Mark Harris in a previous election. There's no way, and his son told him, don't do it. The guy's, is a criminal. No, of course he knew. That wasn't the bug, that was the feature. He's like, if I'm gonna lose to shady guys like this, instead I'm just gonna hire him. If you can't beat him, join him. And so it's one thing to collect absentee ballots and then mail them in on behalf of the campaign. That's already illegal. But these guys unsealed some of the envelopes, changed some of the votes. What they liked the most was finding the ones that were not filled in so that he would fill them in.
Right.
And he'd fill them in with ink that he thought he couldn't get caught on. I mean, and this has like shades of Ozark. Because these poor, folks in this rural area of North Carolina, he's paying them $3 a ballot, and they're like, okay. And then there's this funny part where they're like, it turns out the volunteers, including the stepdaughter of Dallas, they didn't really care about Mark Harris. They were just doing it for the $3.
Yeah.
Of course, they didn't care about Mark Harris.
Yeah, and by the way, Dallas is really dumb, right? And he's a criminal. There's no question about it, but. The way that this was fixed, it was just so obvious because Harris won 61% of the received absentee ballots, even though registered Republicans accounted for only 19% of the ballots submitted.
So I thought two things about that, Anna. One is that is particularly ham-handed. On the other hand, Dallas has done this so many times, it appears that he probably thought, I never get caught. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how egregious it is. It doesn't matter if 100% of the county came in favor of my candidate when normally 80% is against. Who cares? They never catch me. Now he's been caught for perjury and fraud before in other cases, but apparently this is a thing that he gets hired for all the time by Republicans who claim that fraud in regards to elections is the worst thing in the world. And here's a guy who clearly committed election fraud. And even his own son warned the Republican candidate, don't do it, and he hires him anyway. Now, look, seriously, put aside Republican Democrat stuff. The Republicans should not run Mark Harris. It's not good for our democracy, okay? And it would give them a better chance to win. So if all I cared about was partisan politics, I'd say, yeah, sure, run the crook. The Democrat will have a better chance of winning. But don't run the crook, don't do that.
I don't care what the Republicans do in this race at this point. What I do care about though is Republicans just stopping with this nonsense talking point about voter fraud, right? And the voter fraud they claim is committed by people on the left, even though they have failed to provide any real evidence of that. And how many cases of election fraud do we have to provide in order to make it just abundantly clear that Republicans are projecting here? I mean, this election fraud was committed by the Republican side. So, and never mind what happened in Georgia and with Stacey Abrams and that race. I mean, come on, it's just, it goes on and on and on.
It's always projection. But look, I'll end on this note, which is a little bit of hope because the Board of Elections in North Carolina is split between Republicans and Democrats, and they were unanimous. They were unanimous not only at the end when it was super obvious, but in the beginning. And now normally, a lot of times we've seen Republicans go, what voter fraud? I don't, or in this case, election fraud. I don't see any election fraud. What, that county voted, normally votes 19% for Republicans and this time voted 61%? I don't see any problem, certified, right? But they didn't.
Yeah.
So one, you have to give those particular Republicans in North Carolina credit for that.
Fine.
Not the overall party, because the North Carolina Republican Party overall was saying, certify, certify, what do you mean? There's no problem at all, certify, right? But those guys on the election board deserve a lot of credit and a little bit of hope that the system holds. Not every time, maybe not most of the time, but when faced with clear corruption, Anna, sometimes the system actually works.
Fine. Is that what you were referring to earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.